Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. For almost 10 months now, Israel has been attacked by the Lebanese-Iranian proxy Hezbollah. It was a war of attrition in which fire is exchanged by whatever means the parties have at their disposal, short of a ground invasion. Dozens were killed on the Israeli side, and the IDF's response was a systemic operation to degrade Hezbollah's strength by targeting leaders and squads. While both sides signaled a reluctance to escalate, it was inherently explosive, and this past Saturday, in a rocket attack on a peaceful football stadium or soccer field in the village of Majdal Shams, the explosion was triggered. From a face-off on the brink of war, Israel and Lebanon, which has been abducted and held hostage by Hezbollah, are now headed towards a major confrontation, the likes of which was last seen in 2006. Is this war avoidable? What will it entail? And is there a last chance for diplomacy? To analyze it, let's welcome our guests all the way from elsewhere here in the city. Is Professor Ephraim Bar, who is the president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. It's good to see you, Ephraim.
Hi.
Also joining us from the Kingdom of the Netherlands is Professor Uri Rosenthal, formerly a Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. It's good to see you, sir.
Good. Thank you for having me this afternoon. Thank you.
It's good to have you indeed. With me here in the studio is Dr. Neil Boms, who is sitting in for Amir Oren. Neil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jonathan. So as you've said, 10 months ago, 298 days to be precise, since October 7 and the beginning of the Swords of Iron, or really the Gaza war. But as you said, it wasn't just the beginning of the Gaza war. Hezbollah was quick to join. Perhaps the original idea was that Hezbollah will join at the very beginning and at the onset, perhaps with other Iranian proxies. That did not really work, but soon enough, we have emerged. We have seen the emergence of a war of attrition. When you're looking at the graph of Hezbollah missiles, we will see that the consistency, the range, and the accuracy continue to be on the rise in almost every parameter. You've mentioned the tragic affair of Majdal Shams, in where a Hezbollah missile fell, targeted or not, on a football stadium, killing 12 children from the village of Majdal Shams. Just a few hours ago, we've seen another civilian who died as a result of a Hezbollah attack, missile or a rocket from Kibbutz HaGoshrim. And what we have seen is a growing number of missiles in growing range as well. That, of course, joins the overall tension on the other side of Lebanon, because the IDF has been responding and retaliating. Over 80,000 Lebanese have left their homes. Of course, Hezbollah itself have made its own preparations, trying to move some of its assets further north off the Litani and otherwise, trying to hide in other places. None of this was perfect. The IDF has been operating targeted operations and often operated far beyond the lines of southern Lebanon or the Litani line. This has been happening really daily in the past few months. And in the past few days, we have seen this cabinet discussion about the response to Majdal Shams and how this response that will need to be substantive in order to pass a message and in order to perhaps cater to the gravity of what Hezbollah had done, because some of that needs to stop on the one hand, and on the other hand, the will of the Israeli side and probably the Lebanese side, certainly the international community, not to escalate to a full-fledged war. Israel, on the one hand, does not wish to enter another front following 10 days of 10 months of a war in the south and in other areas. The IDF is stretched, although it may need to do that. And Lebanon and Hezbollah very much understands the price of that war, as is the international community. And on the background of all of this, of course, is what's happening in Iran, in the Red Sea. When it comes to the nuclear file, a war in Lebanon will just enable additional attention that is going to be distracted from other very important arenas that needs to be addressed at this vital time. Adding that the coming elections in the United States, and that present another window of opportunity for at least some of the players to pursue certain policies that perhaps in November will also be very different.
Professor Inbal, I'd like to start with you. When we're looking from October 8th to date, Hezbollah launched over 6,000 rockets, missiles, unmanned aerial vehicles in a clear, what Dr. Neil Booms mentioned, escalatory trajectory. One may identify a certain ladder within power dominance or escalation dominance in a conventional sense rather than the nuclear sense that Herman Kahn wrote about. But within that ladder, what can you tell us about that? Where are we within that ladder? And what room for miscalculation is there at this moment in time, considering the height of tensions that we're currently staged in due to the atrocious and heinous strike on the soccer field in Majdal Shams that brought about the devastating result of 12 children killed, murdered, and some 29 others wounded in separate degrees of injury?
I think that the mere fear of escalation is indicative of the unwillingness of a large part of the international community to face the bitter truth that escalation is probably the only way to deal with the situation. The Hezbollah was successful, and behind it, of course, Iran, to put in Israel in its worst position possible, a war of attrition. And in order to end this war of attrition, what is needed is escalation, unquestionable, to try to exact a higher price from Hezbollah in order to force it to end the war of attrition. I think that in strategic terms, continuation of the status quo, hoping for a diplomatic solution, which is extremely doubtful, is harmful to Israeli interests. Of course, I don't know enough about the Israeli military capabilities at the moment to understand that the IDF is overstretched. But if we have the military capabilities, we should not hesitate and go after Hezbollah.
Thank you, Professor Inbar. Professor Uri Rosenthal, I'd like to ask you, you just last week visited Israel as part of the high military group. You were alongside your Finnish counterpart, Timo Soini, namely, the only two diplomats in that group. And from that perspective, also discussing matters, including, for instance, with Lieutenant General or retired Lieutenant General David Abdullah, who planned the entire air campaign of Operation Desert Storm, you had a first-person insight into the variables currently at play, discussing everything from the Prime Minister to the President to all the different heads of the security establishment here in Israel. As a diplomat, what came forth out of those discussions from your precipice, and how would you identify the current state of play vis-a-vis Lebanon?
Well, let me say, Jonathan, that first and foremost, I, as all the others in this group, were extremely impressed with the way in which the IDF is handling this very heavy things I should emphasize in the south. We were not in the north of the country, not at the Lebanon border. And there you go. To give you one of the most compelling experiences we had, we were in Gaza itself. We went with protective vests and a big heavy helmet on our head. We went along the Philadelphia corridor, and on the left side, driving from Kerem Shalom inside Gaza area, we had, of course, the barrier with Egypt, and on the other hand, a completely total destruction of the outskirts of Rafah. And one of our members who has fought all over Asia, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, and Fox shouted to us, and he also made an X message about it, hell. And there you go. On the one hand, in hell, and on the other hand, the message from IDF demonstrated with a lot of evidence that in that part of Gaza at least, every school, every house, every hospital, every mosque is booby-trapped. And if it is not booby-trapped, it is full of explosives, sometimes underground. It means that when houses are being destroyed or buildings are being destroyed, it often doesn't happen because IDF is bombing them, but because they are imploding from the explosives inside these several buildings. Now, the big thing is, and we discussed it very openly with our friends on the Israeli side, it is a hell of a job to bring that message home. And the more so because, as we understand it, Israel is still able, in the public diplomacy and in public communication, to actually do their work in the mainstream media, although you can also be disputing that, looking at even CNN or BBC. But Israel should step up very heavily on the social media. If you are unable to counter the social media campaign from the Hamas, from the Iranian side, you are not going into the right direction. One other point which we noticed is that I will keep it very short and compact. While from Jerusalem, the message is that one is still on the way to eradicate, liquidate Hamas. IDF is talking about dismantling. I understand that in Ivrit they are talking about Peruk, which is just another story, just another way in talking about what are the main objectives of IDF, of the political leadership of Israel.
Indeed. Well, I'll give you the opportunity, Dr. Boms, to draw that lessons learned from the Gaza front for Lebanon, since the social construct in Lebanon is completely different than that in the Gaza Strip. Of course, a Machiavellian approach would be more fitting for Gaza rather than Lebanon, where it's a sectarian composition with the Shiite Hezbollah alongside the Shiite Amal and the derivative thereof not necessarily welcomed or beloved by the other sects, whether it is the Druze or the Christians or the Sunni Muslims for that matter. And therefore, in the event that Israel focuses on confronting Hezbollah, and this draws out into a full-fledged confrontation, what can we expect from the local communities in Lebanon which are not willing to host Hezbollah in any event and are basically hostages of Iran, which employs Hezbollah for its own strategic interests.
In Lebanon, by the way, also in Iran, and broadly in the region, we have two camps. We have the camps of resistance that Iran leads, in some ways also Qatar. Hezbollah is very much a part of that camp, being a proxy of Iran. And we have the more pragmatic and camp, which is sometimes, you can call it the camp of renaissance or just the camp of stability, that is led by the other member countries of the GCC, Saudi Arabia and UAE. Israel is certainly very much a part of that camp, and this is one of the reasons, not only for the Abraham Accords, the relations between these countries, it's also one of the reasons why on April 14th, when Iran had attacked Israel using interballistic missiles, ballistic missiles, drones, we've seen a regional coalition able to work together to prevent it. Coming back to your question and to Lebanon, of course, Hezbollah is far from being a consensual organ in Lebanon. And we've seen that in the last few days, certainly following what had happened on Saturday in Majdal Shams. Hezbollah targeted or just hit a Druze community. And the Druze leader, Walid Jumblat in Lebanon, who is an ally of Hezbollah, has come under significant scrutiny, somewhat from his own community. First saying, look at what are you doing to our own people. Second, their response, their retaliation that is expected, and certainly if that's going to come through a full-fledged war, is going to hurt all the communities in Lebanon. And if Hezbollah is going to drag Lebanon to a war, there are plenty of people there who say, well, we do not like this. We'd like Lebanon for Lebanese. Just like the Iranian demonstrators are calling for their own leadership, that we want to have Iran for Iranians. We don't need to fight other people's wars somewhere else. Is there a chance that some of these groups could do something substantive? So far, they have not succeeded. Hezbollah has entrenched itself in Lebanese politics since it was established, bringing, really pushing some of the other communities further out. Lebanese, the Paris of Beirut, the Paris of the Middle East, became much less Christians and much more Shia in many ways because of Hezbollah's activity. But there are certainly factions inside Lebanon that would like to see Hezbollah lose. And perhaps a smart policy is needed, also by the allies, and this is part of the ideas being discussed for a potential prevention of a war, of how some of that needs to be, some of the power balance in Lebanon can be shifted a little bit again. But I would say that this is not something that we can really hedge or bet significant cards on, because Hezbollah so far was able to only increase its strength rather than decrease its strength. And I'll just add another interesting dimension here. There are 15,000 soldiers on the ground, United Nations observers who are supposed to prevent us from war. The failure of that mechanism to prevent this escalation, disarming Hezbollah, or the failure of the mandate is also something that needs to be taken into consideration by anyone who is looking at this scene. The fact that they are not able to even enter the villages because it's not a part of their mandate, and then Hezbollah is doing exactly what Hamas is doing, or perhaps Hamas is learning from Hezbollah, is placing significant weapons within populated areas to make sure that either they're not going to be found, and then if there's going to be retaliation, there is going to be civilian life loss. So some of these parameters has to change if there's going to be a non-military solution, and if there's going to be a military solution, because most probably there's going to be a continuation of this escalation, at least to a certain degree.
On the domestic front, I'm not sure Walid Jumblat is an ally of Hezbollah. I think the fact of the matter is Hezbollah is part of Syria, Syria is part of Iran. This entire axis is the same composition of the axis that also murdered his father, Kamal Jumblat, back in the day. But there are splinters. It's a classic case of divide and conquer. You see, even within the Maronite community, whether it's the Aouns and others that have sided out of various considerations with Hezbollah versus Jihadiyya, Samir Jihadiyya and others who are very vocal against Hezbollah and are willing to confront them, even though, let's face it, Hezbollah is the most potent force in Lebanon with a very strong backer that does not waver in times of trial. And many of those Christians that in the past had the backing of France, Italy, and others are now not in the same position because of their past backers that are now overrun by Shiites and Sunnis themselves. But that's a different topic to discuss altogether. Professor Inbar, I'd like to ask you, since you are one of the key proponents of a strike or to eradicate Hezbollah, which you've been speaking about for quite some time now, in order to contend with the Iranian threat. But now that ship has sailed, considering the fact that we had to confront the Gaza Strip, Jerusalem made that decision of not confronting two fronts at the same time, but rather now is coming to an end with its confrontation with Hamas, or phase 3, so to speak. It has the opportunity to deal with Hezbollah, and we see Hezbollah also warning that in the event that something like this escalates into a full-fledged war, we got a reminder yesterday about this threat that they are willing also to target Israel's strategic assets, including a drone yesterday that was launched towards the Karish offshore gas reservoir, intercepted by a Sal-6 corvette, an Israeli for that matter. Would we be prudent to confront such a threat by also telling Hezbollah that if you do something like that, Bandar Abbas would be one of those targets that could be targeted?
No, well, I think it's an illusion to believe that there are forces in Lebanon that will successfully resist Hezbollah. The Lebanese society, probably in its entirety, is tired of civil war. They had enough of it. Therefore, it is upon Israel to confront Hezbollah in order to gain stability. Sometimes you need a war to defeat the bad guys. And Hezbollah, in my vocabulary, are the bad guys. And we have to defeat them. I'm not sure that now is the best time. I admit that. But the war against Hezbollah is inevitable because it is part of the Iranian coalition against it. And I think everybody in the region looks at Israel to do the job. Nobody else is going to fight Iran or its proxies. Saudi Arabia failed to meet the Houthi challenge, largely due to the, excuse my language, stupidity of the American administration that in its initial stage demanded of the Saudis to end the war against the Houthis. And I think also the American policy in Lebanon is a failure. Trying to arm the Lebanese army, hoping that they will fight Hezbollah, is another illusion, American illusion. Therefore, a war against Hezbollah is inevitable. Otherwise, we have already a monster next to us, just as Hamas. The only difference is that Hamas is was a smaller monster. We could deal with it. Hezbollah is an organization with more missiles than most armies in the world. We simply cannot live next to this threat. Containment is a failure. This policy has failed. We've seen it in Gaza, and it must not, if possible, continue on the northern front. Yeah. Therefore, the fear of war is not warranted. What we need is a war to defeat Hezbollah and put an end to this terrible threat.
Professor Rosenthal, we don't have very much time left, and therefore I'd like to ask you, Giorgia Meloni earlier today warned Israel that a retaliation would be considered as a trap established by Hezbollah and Iran. Do you see Israel, an Israeli retaliation for the horrendous massacre committed of 12 innocent children playing soccer as a trap for Israel to be lured into, considering the fact that irrespective of the quantity of missiles and projectiles in the possession of Iran, which Professor Inbar is true to point out, Israel is far more superior in all parameters.
I hear from my sources, I hear that there is a understanding among many of the member states of the EU, not by the way with this terrible High Representative Joseph Borrell, that Israel is entitled to act after this horrible matter. And by the way, also what was told already, the increasingly sophisticated and intense aggression on the part of Hezbollah. Now, I hear that there is discussion about several scenarios which would be acceptable or non-acceptable. And there we go. When Professor Inbar is talking about a war, one of the scenarios I hear about is a rather limited war. And in any case, the red line would be attacking Beirut and large civil infrastructures. That's one remark I could make. Another one, I would like to stress that during our stay in Israel with this group, of course, everything was overarched by the Tehran and Ayatollah's powerful ring of fire. And for that matter, my question would be whether Iran actually wants to lose its most powerful proxy, which is not Hamas, which is already on the way of being lost, but its most powerful proxy, Hezbollah. And that is something which I suppose is also a matter of discussion and consideration in the international diplomatic circles.
We'll end today's discussion with that question. I'd like to thank Professor Uri Rosenthal, Professor Ephraim Inbar, and Dr. Neil Bohms, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.